So I wanted to address some of the questions and comments that I got on the defense of Inika build video. So this is sort of a follow-up to that, expansion on that in some ways. Before I go ahead and show you some of these pieces though, I just want to start this video by showing something completely different in relation to the last video I put out, which had to do with the McBorak, right? The McDonald's Matoran equivalent of the Borak, right? And I love this. So this is a resin cast that I made yesterday, pulled out last night, and went ahead and worked it in orange, which I think I did a pretty good job. It's my first attempt with orange, so I'm really happy with it, and I can't wait to use it on a handful of different projects here in the future. So now I guess I can argue that I have the biggest Borak shield collection in the world. That's still not true. But with that said, though, I wanted to defend the Inika build one more time. However, from a bit of a different perspective here. Now, a lot of people have made the argument that, well, not everything that came after 2006 was an Inika build, often holding up the example of a Kina, right? Which, yeah, that makes sense, sort of. It depends on how you look at what an Inika build is, how you define it. My definition of an Inika build is going to be something that has a ball-jointed neck, ball-jointed arms, ball-jointed hips, usually is built up out of very few parts as well. In essence, you could even make the argument that CCBS could fall into this as well. Because the Inika build is pretty versatile and also not super descript. A lot of people will say like the Paraka sets are Inika builds. I guess they don't really call them that to the same degree because the Inika builds have torso armor, things like that. But the Paraka body can as well. And it still sort of fills out the same philosophy. So I don't see anybody looking at like Huki or Halimari from 2007 saying, oh, those aren't Inika builds because they're not using the Inika torso, right? It's the design that was set up in 2006. I don't actually think it's a bad design. It's not my favorite by any means, and I made an argument in the last video talking about the Metru Toa specifically, saying that they were basically like the perfect form over function, or form and function balance. And I still believe that. They're not perfect by any means. So anybody that kind of took it as though I was saying that like Metro builds are great, I don't necessarily believe that either. I think they're good. They're fine as they are. I'm obviously most nostalgic for the Toa Mata. I like them better overall, but I understand what the Toa Metro were trying to do. And with a handful of corrections to the Toa Mata platform, I think that I like that one the best, but that's for a different video. That said, I had a lot of people saying, well, Kina, what about Kina? And that's true. Kina does have a specialized build for her body, but also the same is true for sets like Strack or Kangumari, right? Is Strack an Inika build? Well, I would make the argument that he is. Yes, he does something a bit different with that platform. Is Kangumari an Inika build? I would say so. It still is doing the same kind of thing. I would make the argument that Kina also is an Inika build because of the design philosophy that goes behind this set. I really appreciate the set for not only the aesthetic, I think it looks quite nice, but also for the fact that LEGO was willing to try and do something this different in the last wave, essentially, outside of the Stars sets, right? I think that 2009, specifically, the first half of it got a lot of praise for the differences in the characters and in their builds. Essentially, it sets out to do what 2007 did. And in some ways, I think it does better. Now, that is definitely an argument that I could see being made in both directions. And also, just because I think it does it better doesn't mean that they were trying to achieve the same thing, right? Anyway, before I get into too bit of a tangent here, I just want to talk about the Inika torsos themselves. And in fact, every variant of this, right? So you have the Inika torso and the Paraka torso, both of which were introduced in 2006. In 2007, LEGO gave us the Kangumari torso, a very strange piece, if I am being honest, but it's a nice piece at the very least, and it does only come in two colors, but thankfully one of those colors is gray, so it's a neutral. At the very least, that makes it usable on more characters than just one element, right? An interesting piece, though, in that it doesn't have any ball joints on its own. So this is probably the furthest that we would get from the true Inika torso. But obviously, you are intended to add the ball joints on yourself. And that's probably done because of this axle connection, if you think about it. Lego designed this piece with soft plastic, polypropylene, and the main reason that they did that was because it has the axle included. That's not something that Lego normally does with these torsos. But because it had the axle, they really couldn't make it out of ABS because of issues like friction and snapping of that axle, right? And so oftentimes you will find that when something has an axle included, it is going to be this softer plastic material. But then you have the problem of, well, what about the ball joints? Because they can't be polypropylene, because then you have problems with those getting scuffed up and scratched up and losing friction. So it's a balance, right? This is intended to work with the Hordika arm. It can also work with the Hordika neck as well on these shoulders, but I don't believe that's been done, at least by Bionicle. By others, sure. So it's a good piece, and it's definitely something that is, as I mentioned, intended to be used with other parts, right? To fill out a similar, I'm trying to think of how I want to phrase this, to fill out a similar, to reach the same end goal as other Inika builds. The last that we would see in terms of specialized torsos before CCBS, of course, would be this one here, not including the Avmatoran bodies, right? This one here is also what I would consider an Inika style torso. It starts to stretch out quite a bit. Literally, of course, it is quite a bit larger than any of the others in basically every dimension. It is still the same width, at the very least, as some of the others, because I do think Bionicle tended to get bigger and bigger as time went on. People were calling it size creep, and I believe that that is true. But the reason I brought all these in here to kind of show specifically had to do with these armor pieces. Because the 2006 Inika basically leveled up what the Paraka did. The Paraka didn't come with armor, they had spines, and the torso itself was metallic colored to make that sort of armor implication, right? These, however, acted as the armor for these pieces, which is why these have a little bit more of a generic shape to them, rather than the more piston-laden shape of the Paraka torsos, or at least it's one reason why. But because these are designed to fit these armor pieces so well, too well, in fact, it leaves these a little more vulnerable to not being used elsewhere. Which is one reason why I think Lego stayed with this type of body for so long. Because what could they replace it with? If Lego, for example, had given up the Inika build for this body, it would still be an Inika build. Everybody would still have the same gripes because this still attaches in all of the same ways as an Inika body does. So it would get boring. It would get repetitive. And yes, there is an armor specifically made for this torso as well, and it's a good piece. In fact, I think it does something a bit better than these do, and that's this dimensionality to these pieces, right? You'll see that the back of this is flat, perfectly flat on the back side, whereas this has these little protrusions that stick out. That limits its uses. The same is true for the other type of Inika armor as well, meaning that it's much harder to use these types of armors with, almost dropped it, but I caught it. It's much harder to use these types of armors with the Paraka torso, for example, because of the shaping of that piece. It can, this one specifically, can be used with the Kangumari torso. In fact, it can be used in both directions. So you can clip a pin, I was going to say a pin to the side there, right? And it works. It works fine. It stretches the body out quite a bit, but I think that that does work in its favor. And obviously, one of the notable design choices of this is the fact that it's so short. It allows for you to make shorter characters with that Inika build. You can, of course, put it on facing the opposite direction as well, and I think it works out really nicely, in fact. So definitely something I plan on messing around with in the future. That said, though, these pieces are still kind of locking that Inika build into Lego, or rather, locking Lego into the Inika build, right? The reason I say that is because as you continue to develop these parts for this system, you sort of bury yourself in the system further and further, right? CCBS does what it does because it does so, at least to start, with actually pretty few new molds, right? You have the torso, of course, you have the torso armor, you have 3 or 4 different sizes of shell to begin with, and then more sizes would come out as time went on. You had add-ons to come out later as well, and you basically had an upper arm, a lower arm, new fists to replace the old sockets. If the old sockets had held up, they probably would have just used that instead of replacing that fist entirely, and of course the feet as well. And that all works. It's a lot of pieces to make molds for, but you'll understand that in the Ordeal of Fire for Hero Factory, when that sort of system was released, most of those pieces only came in a handful of colors. Many of them were reused over and over again because Bionicle, or Lego rather, had built this system where essentially the skeleton was one color and everything else that was slapped on was another, which obviously saves them money, of course. They developed this brand new system, but at the end of the day, it's not as ambitious as people I think it is. A lot of people point out the fact that CCBS is essentially a 3-tiered system where you have bones or the body, the armor that goes on top of it, and then the add-on that goes on top of that. In rare occasions, you could do more, but that's inherently limiting too, in much the same way as this, right? Just like with the CCBS torso armor, which thankfully does get a handful of variations, you can use that on the legs of a figure to sort of build it out, fill it out more. You could do the same with parts like this as well. But they sort of look like they're designed to do one thing. And CCBS, in my opinion, at least to start out with, doesn't do anything revolutionary in the sense that, yes, it's a system, but it's a system that just takes away all of the intricacy of, say, Bionicle, which came before it, and replaces it with essentially just nothingness. Axles, ball joints, pins, sockets. Now, that's all fine. It's kind of all you really need. But I think one of the reasons that people can go back to parts like this is that extra bit of detail in there, right? The pistons and things like that. That is part of what makes Bionicle what it is. But at the end of the day, there are limits to every building piece. In fact, that's part of what I think is so clever about Bionicle, about CCBS, about Lego in general, is that there are so many things that even nearing 2 decades, well, passing 2 decades since Bionicle began, people are only discovering today. And that says something. The fact that you can connect 2 pieces in a way that nobody has ever done before, or at least hasn't documented before, still, when there are millions of people that have held Bionicle pieces in their hands, that's profound. And it's unlike a lot of other toys out there. It speaks to the ingenuity, I don't know what I want to say, but I was going to say ingenious as well, and I realized that just sounds like ingenuity. So, but you get my point, right? There's a flexibility built into Bionicle. I don't think it's perfect. Again, it's clear that several different types of connections are not intentional, but the fact that you can do them at all is still high praise from me. I have a very particular type of building style. I tend to favor things that are much more closely accurate, I guess you'd say, to what Lego would have done. Not because I don't appreciate really advanced building systems or people who have spent a lot of time honing their craft and coming up with like the perfect attachment for this piece to get this right angle. Like, I admire that stuff, but it's not my thing specifically. It's fun when I do it on occasion, but I leave that for other people because it's not what speaks to me, because Bionicle is, as I've mentioned, like a language, like any other. And so everybody sort of speaks it their own way. And everybody's right, Just because you do something in a way that somebody else doesn't appreciate or doesn't like or doesn't understand doesn't mean that it's not good. And it also doesn't mean that you're not already on your way to mastering your style, your fluency in that language. So anyway, I feel like I've probably stretched this video out longer than I needed to, but you hopefully get the point with this one. There are some really interesting, fun pieces for 2006 through 2009 and so on. Even 2010 with Hero Factory introducing some really fun pieces as well. It's worth playing around with them, experimenting with them, trying new things with pieces you've never seen before. If you've gone to like a Lego shop or something like that, or someone bricks and minifigs or whatever that you have that's near you, and you've just decided to pick through a bin of Bionicle parts, maybe pick something out because it looks strange. That's sometimes the most fun that I've had. Honestly, one of these days, I just want to go to one of these stores. Maybe it's a video idea, even. Go to one of these stores and try building something at the location, right? Don't take any pieces with me. Just see what I can build on hand in like an hour's time with somebody else's collection. And that's a really cool concept. Anyway, I'm getting far ahead of myself. I really like that as an idea though. So that's going to be it for this one, guys. If you did enjoy this video, make sure you like and subscribe. It does really help out the channel. You can tell I'm very tired, by the way. It's been a crappy, crummy, cloudy, windy mornings, just very chilly outside. And if you saw my short that I put out yesterday, I also showed this little creative build. Remember how I was talking about that in the video with this little snail here, just 2 pieces, a Lego Friends stethoscope, and a motorcycle helmet, which I quite enjoy. So that's pretty much it though. Like I said, if you want to join the conversation, you can check out the comments below, or of course, sorry, loud car. You can check out the Discord, Instagram, and Patreon, all of which are in the description. And I'll see y'all guys in the next one. Take care.